All right, so here we go, picking back up where I left off with pissing everyone off. That was about a week ago. I did not intend for it to be this long, but it is the first week of April 2026, and it's been a long one. And I was tempted, honestly, not to go on, but I feel like still no one is saying all the things that need to be said, and it's only getting worse because I hear the usual suspects in the political media, the chattering classes, and the consultancy classes. Basically, scuttlebutt, like coming out of the most recent primaries, is like, oh, well, what's even the point of like running a good candidate running in this district because, AIPAC's just going to come spend $10 million there. So they're just saying it openly that like Wall Street and AIPAC run the country and choose who our government officials are, and we don't get a say in it. Like, they just say it openly now. But anyway, of course, that's, as I tried to explain in my first video here, like, that is not at all a complete or accurate picture of what happened in the Illinois 9th race and why Abughazaleh was defeated by Daniel Biss. And that there are so many things that went into that, all of which we need to understand so that we campaign smarter in the future. And not just smarter, because Kat is extremely intelligent, and I don't doubt the campaign staff she had is very smart too. But I mean, wisdom maybe is a better word. And that comes with experience. But it's also about building coalitions. And I think I see her taking steps towards doing that now, starting her own grassroots group. And I would just encourage the folks around her, if any of them see this, to like just make sure that in everything you do, you're communicating that the other candidates, worthy candidates, worthy of respect, like Mike Simmons or Abughazaleh, as contentious as things got, that you make it clear, I'm not here to beat them or, conquer their turf or whatever. I'm here to be a part of this community and organize like they are. And we're not in competition, we're part of the same struggle. Like, just make sure that permeates all the communication with the new group. And anyway, back to what I meant to talk about, because I said last time, if we want to, that one of the first things I see that jumps out at me is that people are quick to criticize everyone else but don't want to criticize themselves. So I said I was going to fall on my sword, and here it is, because I gave Abughazaleh a terrible piece of advice at a candidate forum. I literally, in passing, told her that it would be a good idea for her to do an interview with a certain figure in leftist political media, and to say who that figure is. Well, I just want to get in the Wayback Machine and travel back to when Abughazaleh was still, a tot, and we had actually another candidate where I grew up in Virginia. We had another candidate in the midst of the Iraq War where I had been in high school when September 11th happened. And so for us, it was immediate. And from a military community, it's like immediately we had classmates, we knew people that were going off to war. And when it was in Afghanistan, that was one thing. Okay, the people who attacked us were in Afghanistan, they're harbored by the government there, yada, yada. But then, of course, just a couple years later, all of a sudden it became, now we need to go attack this other country that had nothing to do with it because daddy issues and oil and infinite greed. And the fury, they spent a couple years spinning a yarn about, non-existent weapons and nonsense. But once people caught on to that, by about 2005, 2006, the fury people felt, especially young people, seeing what was happening to our friends and classmates. Anyway, there was a sharp young woman who was tenacious, fearless, that really became the voice for a lot of what we were feeling, especially in terms of the fatuous and illegal Iraq War, which murdered millions of people, caused untold devastation to that nation and to all the people that went over there. Basically a bunch of kids from, like, chosen by Heritage Foundation, fresh out of the frat house. This was basically the prototype for Project 2025, was the destruction of Iraq by a bunch of little degenerate man-children that were sent over there because they Sieg-Heiled George W. Bush to run the country. Anyway, that young woman's name, who went on to run for Congress and channel a lot of those feelings, was Krystal Ball. And she ran when she was fresh out of college, like Kat did. And like Kat, she was in journalism. That was her field of study. And so she was very savvy, just like Kat, very savvy with the media game. Very good at the online and facet of campaigning, and was doing very well. And so, of course, had to be targeted by Nancy Pelosi and the DNC, because their purpose is not to defeat Republicans or fascists of any kind. Their purpose is to crush working people and the left. That is what they exist to do. That is how they are structured. And even when the Republicans are literal Nazis who are launching more wars than we can count illegally and destroying our national parks, destroying our air and water, breaking every law, just openly stealing money right in front of us, taxpayer money. No, that's not what the DNC, or the Democratic Party of today, is here to worry about. No, as long as the Boomercrats, the Wall Street AIP, the Wall Street and AIPAC-backed Democrats are the ones in charge, then what they're here to do is crush democracy, squelch working people, crush the left, and certainly young people. Anyone under 50, is kids to them. These boomers who literally believe they're going to live forever. So they targeted Krystal and tried to undercut her and make sure that a Republican would win the seat again. Because there had been a popular Republican incumbent who had passed on of cancer, and that's why, how the seat opened back then. And the worst thing they could come up with, though, on Krystal back then was these scandalous photos of her at a Halloween party wearing a leather outfit. That's it. They're like, oh my God, this Krystal Ball who says war is bad, she sometimes might, by implication, have sex. Can you believe it? And so that's, they said we can't back such a scandalous candidate who occasionally might have consensual sex with grown adults. We have to make sure that the seat will go to our dear, honorable, esteemed GOP gang of pedophile, Nazi child raper friends on the other side of the aisle. And then after that, Krystal got hired by MSNBC back when MSNBC had recently decided to try to become a liberal channel recently, because they were rah for the Iraq War when it started. They were trying to be Fox Light in those days. Tucker Carlson had a show on MSNBC, y'all, for the youngins who may not realize. And, they had Dan Savage, a theocratic, raving lunatic, was the morning of, it literally was only in, 2005, 4 or 5, because of the backlash of Iraq, that MSNBC started trying to triangulate to be, a liberal channel, briefly. But they put Krystal on there as part of one of those panel, Crossfire imitation shows with S.E. Cupp and a couple of other folks. And then she was able to sort of get her start and branch out from there and start, breaking points where the idea was. And I feel this so much because in my own way in academia, I was trying to do the same thing that Krystal was trying to do, which was I thought, okay, the average voter that's voting for these Nazis is rabid and insane, and either they don't seem to understand how they're hurting themselves economically and otherwise, or they don't care. But maybe if we get to the thought leaders, the people who are capable of reason and rationality, and talk to them, that's how we reestablish some sort of dialogue and civic engagement and political culture again. And so she was trying to do that through her programs at the Hill and online. And she, just like I found out over the span of like late Obama and Trump's first term, found out it was a waste of time. But anyway, the point is, it makes me sad to have to sit here and say, what the actual fuck was that so-called interview? Because I like Krystal. I only met her once at a football game briefly when one of her friends was dating one of my friends. So I don't want anyone, I just want to be clear about what my priors are here. Like, I have no personal connection. I do not speak to her. Well, I mean, I occasionally write her missives on social media pertaining to queer issues and stuff. I have no idea if she even reads them or not. But, you know, this is not someone who's like a personal friend of mine, or that I'm carrying water for out of any kind of personal affinity. But I have been a fan of hers ever since she ran. And it did make me feel proud that we came from the same community, which was a nice thing to feel. I didn't get to feel that much. You know, it's certainly not, not in the political context. There's a lot good about where I grew up, and there's a lot that I found out, like a lot of us have found out, really was never real. That, you know, it was a pretty lie, though. It was a pretty lie. And there was some of it that was real. The values we were taught. Communal values, looking out for your neighbor, that sort of thing that used to be considered traditional, rural, conservative values, community. And so that's part of what makes this hard. And, you know, I've had conversations with youngins lately, like millennials, Gen Z, you know, that make me realize, you know, it pains me a little bit to think about how they don't really, you know, it's like they're looking for the angle, you know, like it's like there's forms of affinity and human connection that I almost feel like they've never had the chance to experience. But just like the connection of like, I don't know someone personally, but I know, you know, people that know them. I know that we were taught by some of the same people. I know that we look up to some of the same people. And I know, you know, there's a complex tapestry or pastiche or whatever you want to call it of very specific experiences that, you know, we had growing up, that, you know, we have we share something so particular that it can't be put into words, and that it makes me feel a sense of connection to the people that went through the same thing and that are out there in the world trying to do good, and feel like, yes, well, look at her, look at the good she's doing, and I'm a product of the same environment, and so that makes me feel good about what I'm trying to do, you know? And I fear that as communities erode and everyone's just in their car, in their cubicle, in their apartments, and no one in all these rural areas have become exurbs now, where no one even knows their neighbors anymore. That sense of connectedness is going away, because that is the thing that helps ground people, you know? And, but anyway, rambling, the old timer I am. But the point is, I don't enjoy having to vocalize public criticism of Krystal, but it genuinely shocked me, because when I see the event that I happened to see Kat at, it was a day or two after she had done an interview with Kyle Kulinski, Secular Talk. That's Krystal Ball's husband, and, you know, he's someone that got his start back in those same days when she was running for Congress. And so he had done a great interview with Kat where he certainly was not like playing patty cakes. And he asked some incisive, probing questions. But, he did his thing well. She did well. And very much message discipline. Kat, especially for someone that young, I mean, very disciplined candidate. Sometimes maybe even too much. Like, that she should have improvised a little more sometimes, I feel. But she had, like, her talking points, and she was trying to do it the Republican way, just like repetition, keep it simple. But anyway, so having seen that interview went well, I said, literally in passing, I said to her, Krystal Ball, you should do an interview with her too, because she's tough, but she'll be a really fair interviewer, and that'll get you some good exposure with different viewers, because she co-hosted a show with a right-wing guy at one point, and has been on a lot of different outlets and yada yada. Like, a lot of different folks will see it. And yeah, I thought there will be someone that will do the right kind of interview with her that will help, because Kat Abughazaleh had no trouble getting free media, or what used to be called earned media, but she, as I discussed last time, it's questionable how much of that actually helped her. And I don't even think this is all, like, even a choice on her part. I think it was a snowball at a certain point where it just kept coming. And it's like these shows that are based in New York or the West Coast or wherever are having Kat Abughazaleh back on for, like, the third or fourth interview. And meanwhile, they haven't talked to any other candidates in the race. And they don't seem to grasp the level of, like, resentment that will create. And, like, especially with Kat being young and brand new here, that, like, all the people that have worked and organized here for decades that were trying to run, that, you had these outlets like Majority Report, quite frankly, and a couple of others that thought they were doing something helpful, but it's like, really, you were only hurting Kat and salting wounds and widening divisions in the way that you engaged with this race. Because you did not add, you just brought, like, light and no heat, and you gave overexposure to a candidate that was already doing good with media exposure, but you did not engage with the local issues in depth, because you saw, like I and like a lot of people, you saw Kat as just like a great gladiator that you wanted to be in the national arena, and I want that too. But without engaging with the local issues and the local leaders and figures here, that in Chicago politics, like, people don't just come out of the blue, like, especially the leftist candidates who tend to be working class candidates. It's like, you can't just say, shut up and fall in line for this privileged child from a Republican family in Texas. Doesn't matter how good a candidate she is. Like, you can't expect that to just not lead us here. It's especially in the way politics are done in this city, because it's a one-party system here. It's about consensus building. It's not just like, mine's bigger than yours, I raise more money than you, bow down, get in line. That's not how it works. Not here. I don't know about New York, but it's like, it was not helpful. It was not helpful. And so I thought I was giving Kat a good piece of advice, because I thought, Krystal Ball, here we go. We'll do an in-depth interview. That when I saw it was an hour long, I was like, perfect. She'll do an in-depth interview, and she'll do her research really well, and she'll know about different. She'll be able to do a compare and contrast between Kat and the other candidates, and say what makes you better than this person to represent this community, and yada yada. And she'll talk about the housing crisis we have in our district that's especially acute. And, all this other stuff. I thought she will do an interview that, yes, will give Kat exposure, but will also help, like, flesh her out as a candidate for people, and will not feel like it's just a hype machine. It's like, it'll feel like a real challenging interview that, like, it just seemed like it would be a good thing all around. I had very high hopes and expectations. I did. I was excited when I sat down to watch that interview, which came out less than a week before the primary. And also, Krystal had Ryan Grimm with her, who I've seen him interviewed around. I don't know as well, about his work and all. But the entire interview, an hour of it. I mean, they had some quick introductory chit-chat and general sort of questions, fair enough. The entire interview ended up being about Ukraine and Kat's position on Ukraine. And a staffer that she had just let go of, who had mischaracterized some of her positions, who, I don't know what that guy's deal was. But the point is, Kat has actually a really thoughtful and morally consistent position, unlike a lot of people on the left who say they're down for, against empire and for the rights and autonomy of colonized and subjugated people. But if those people, are European or have skin that looks like this, then all of a sudden, And if you know the history, and I have Irish ancestry, so I can only view it through that lens. How could I not hear and care for, the cries of the people of Ukraine or the people of Palestine as someone with Irish blood? I was taught that, nothing could be more shameful. I was taught by two Irish grandmothers that nothing could be more shameful to an Irish person than that kind of indifference to human suffering, or have any tolerance or forbearance for colonialism. And that's why, that's why Ireland is not a part of NATO, or and occupies a different stance in a lot of ways than other European countries, is because they were colonized by England, brutalized, had a genocide committed against them, mass starvation in the 1800s that annihilated or drove out more than half of the population. Ireland is only just now, today, getting back to the population level it was at in 1820, before England began their open genocide after 200 years of colonization and full-scale invasion, and hundreds of years longer than that of history. But anyway, and in the case of Ukraine, here is, the history of that land is an extremely complicated one, but it was the center of Kievan Rus before the Mongols came, when Moscow was just a swamp. Some vassals. So the people from Moscow were vassals of the Mongols, but then, they used Mongol help to conquer and subdue other Slavic people, including Novgorod, the city of Novgorod, which had a republican form of government, as in elected officials, representative government. And then they turned their attention southward, to capturing Kiev and driving into the Caucasus, and they conquered a people called the Hazari, who lived in the northern Caucasus in the late 1000s, or maybe it was late 900s, somewhere around there, about 1,000 years ago, and a significant portion of this civilization was Jewish. And basically, when the Russian Empire as such was formalized, they made all the people that they conquered from the Caucasus, in addition to any Slavic Jews, they designated eastern Ukraine as an area known as the Pale of Settlement, and said, this is where you have to go. This is where you have to live. You're not allowed to own land in the city, and you're not allowed to live anywhere else in the whole of the Russian Empire, which was rapidly expanding across two continents, conquering one civilization after another out in on the Asian side, over the Ural Mountains, in what we call Siberia now. And so It was basically like a version of the Gaza Strip, or the American version of the Gaza Strip would be Oklahoma, which was called the Indian Territory until 1908. Then it was where we sent all the people who survived our genocide on the East Coast. And then we found oil underneath of it, and we did it all over again. But that's a story for another day. The point is, the questions that Krystal Ball asked about Ukraine seemed as if they were frozen in amber. She was speaking as if it was like April of 2022. The questions, and if you want to, I'm not going to, this is already long, so I'm not going to get into a full breakdown. If you want a full breakdown of all the factual inaccuracies and misstatements and mischaracterizations that were woven into all of Krystal's very repetitive questions, I would refer you to a young man from Maryland who's been going back and forth to Ukraine covering the war the whole time. A young Ukrainian American named Dylan Burns, who did a really good review, breakdown of that travesty of an interview, which is by far, by a country mile, the worst piece of so-called journalism I've ever seen Krystal Ball do in 20 years. And was, honest to God, just shocking. But then I was mad at myself for being shocked, see, because I reflected on how much they had in common. And people get funny. People get funny when, about the passage of time, and they see someone that reminds them of their younger self, and sometimes they have a weird reaction to it. And I don't know if that's, I'm not trying to psychoanalyze Krystal. I don't know if how much of that was at play here, but also I'm fully aware, and this is why I explained the high school experience and 9/11, because I want everyone to understand where Krystal is coming from too. That, we've been lied to again and again, and there's always people our age that suffered, that these boomers sent to die while they kicked others of us out of their homes, while they made sure none of us would have jobs when we graduated from college, and meanwhile printed infinity bajillion dollars for Elon Musk and Peter Thiel to develop surveillance technologies to enslave humanity and AI and everything else. That's what the arch traitor, the great deceiver Obama was doing, and Rahm Emanuel and his whole ghoulish administration that laid waste to the Democratic Party at the state and local level, sucked up all the money and all the data from themselves, and thought they could dictate and control the course of the party's future, along with AIPAC and along with Wall Street and Jamie Dimon and Geithner and Summers and all those crooks and thieves and traitors. So that is where Krystal Ball is coming from when she exhibits this extreme response, this allergy, one might say, not just to sending troops overseas but to any type of military involvement in anything, I guess. And given that that interview happened to be a few days after the Trump regime began its illegal and barbaric bombing campaign of civilian targets in Iran, it's understandable, why emotions are high, and it's understandable why people are looking for strong commitments as far as where we send Americans. But to have Krystal Ball sit there for an hour and browbeat a candidate for Congress who will not have any ability to impact policy here anyway. So what is it even that we're talking about? But to have, she asked about Taiwan and kept revisiting that, but only briefly. It was really all about Ukraine. And as I look back on her old work, it does seem like Krystal, I don't know what this fixation or hate boner is that she asked for Ukraine. But you were asking Kat not just to say, I wouldn't send American troops to fight there. You were basically asking her to disavow them and tell them to lay down and surrender. You're playing a James Carville. Just play dead. Just play dead. Just lay down and play dead and let the Nazis do whatever they want to you. That's it. You can't have any knowledge of what's going on and pretend that Vladimir Putin, who has been in power literally for as long as Kat Abughazaleh has been alive, that he has any interest in negotiations or peace any more than Trump or Yahoo does. Are you serious? The Hydra has 3 heads, okay? The Hydra has 3 heads. But I don't know what it is that, like, everyone has it's a different kind of Hydra we're fighting now, because it's like each of the 3 heads has its own form of manipulation that it does. And so it leads to this odd situation where you can have brave knights who will gladly lay down their lives fighting 2 of the 3 heads, and yet they will also lay down their lives to defend the 3rd one. And in the case of a lot of leftists, the one they have the blind spot for is Putin in Russia. But they, like, as long as one head survives, it doesn't matter. It revives the other 2. That's why a Hydra is a good metaphor. So, in the case of Krystal, I don't know what, it's just this belief that, like, the Kremlin is a rational, reasonable, like, actor that doesn't want to conquer and colonize other people. Again, refer to Dylan Burns for if you want a full breakdown of just how fatuous all of her questions were. But what makes it beyond bad journalism into something truly wicked, quite frankly, is, it's either Krystal knew this or she didn't, and either way is unacceptable. Either she knew what she was doing or she didn't know, and it's an unacceptable level of ignorance for someone that calls themselves a journalist that's interviewing candidates from here. But Chicago is the cultural and demographic center of Ukrainian America. Okay, after the Cold War ended and Ukraine regained its independence, and they fought hard, there were 100 Ukrainians or thereabouts that was actually during the coup against Gorbachev in Moscow in 1991, when the hardliners Gorbachev was trying to do a treaty to give more autonomy to the Russian colonies, the ones they called brotherly republics, Soviet republics or whatever. Nations that had been Russian colonies before the USSR and which remained so as part of the USSR. But the point is, he was trying to give them more autonomy, not freedom, but more autonomy. And there was a coup against him in 1991. And during that, there were actually Ukrainians that were helping Russians defend the legislature, because Gorbachev had introduced an elected legislature to the Soviet Union in the 80s. And so the legislature supported what Gorbachev was doing, the new treaty or whatever. And so they were actually standing, side by side, shoulder to shoulder with Russian citizens fighting to protect the chance for Ukraine to become more independent, but also the chance for Russians to have something more democratic. And anyway, so Ukraine was among the first of the brotherly republics, Russian colonies, to formally declare its full autonomy and independence in August of 91, I believe. And after that happened, in 93, or I guess whenever, literally when there began to be, relations were established between all these new countries and the USA, and new countries, you understand, meaning recently established nation states, not a new civilization or new culture like that. But the first freaking direct flight from Ukraine to the United States, where do you think it was? It was not Kyiv to Washington, D.C. It was not Kyiv to New York City, our political capital or economic capital. No. The first flights between our country and Ukraine were Kyiv to Chicago. Okay? The first direct nonstop flights were Kyiv to Chicago. And here's a candidate running on the north, in a district, ridiculous gerrymander district that runs from the north side of Chicago up into the northwestern side and suburbs of Chicago. Lots of Ukraine. If you imagine Chicago like a wheel, where most of the city exists between 6 to 12, and there's Michigan everywhere. Everything from the west side all the way up to the north. there's lots of Ukrainians. I see Ukrainian flags and decals and decorations all the time here. It's, as many Irish or, Polish people call Chicago home, like Ukrainians have been a big part of the city's history from the beginning. Palestinians as well. Literally, in the late 1800s, there was very severe, pogroms and anti-Jewish hate. There was a czar named Alexander who was really nasty, and even by czar standards. Yada, yada. During that time, Ukrainian and Polish people, just for reasons of nationality, or Jewish people from any of those countries, were trying to get out of the Russian Empire. A lot of them ended up over here. People who've been part of the Polish-Ukrainian independence movements ended up over here. Yada, yada. A lot of Ukrainian people, just like there's a lot of Palestinian people that came over here around the same time. And here's Krystal Ball. The polls are neck and neck between Kat Abughazaleh and this candidate who is not AIPAC's preferred candidate, but who is certainly the candidate who would probably call himself pro-business and will be aligned with the interests of capital, and who may be more morally flexible, shall we say, if the price is right, on any number of issues. Maybe not. We'll see. He just got elected. I won't prejudge. He's done some good things as the mayor of Evanston. He has. There's criticism as well. But point being, AIPAC's most preferred candidate did not win this one, but nevertheless, a corporate-backed establishment candidate did win. And a candidate who we hope will have some of the same vision and tenacity and taking affirmative steps to combat fascism. But we shall see. However, for Krystal Ball as a journalist, the difference was 3,000 votes. The difference was 3,000 votes. And in that situation, everyone was talking about all the dark influencers that were directly paid by these either AIPAC or DNC related groups to attack Kat. And I think, frankly, Kat's campaign made a bit too much of that at the end. They were trying to play victim card a bit too much when, they'd raised a lot of money and everyone perceived them as, a powerful, strong campaign, if not a front runner. So, point is, I don't think those paid dark influencers had much influence at the end. But I think Krystal did. I can't quantify it. I don't know. But I think Krystal did, because you had so many people, there are so many people who consider themselves leftist, progressives, socialists, anti-imperialist, what have you, all quarters of the left, who have reached a point of despair and horror where they just think, if we are giving weapons and money to a government, then it must be an evil government. What other explanation could there be? And for people that don't know enough, that is not a unreasonable supposition or generalization to operate under as a starting point. But for a journalist, after now 4 years of full-scale war, and then a decade before that of partial war, limited war, with Russia having invaded and annexed one regional capital in eastern Ukraine, and then all of the Crimean Peninsula. Let's just put it this way. Everything that Russia is doing in Ukraine and has been doing all this time is everything we are doing in Iran and everything we did in Vietnam. All the same atrocities, all the same war crimes, all the same flagrant violations of international humanitarian law and the Geneva Conventions, hunting people like animals, calling it a safari, speaking of Ukrainians as subhuman. All of it. The bombing hospitals, bombing schools, poisoning the water, all of it. All of it. And there's too many leftists that just become relativists and degenerates when they look outside of our own borders, or they become narcissistic, and they, without even realizing it, they engage in their own form of imperialism where they believe that everything in the world happens because of us, and no one else in the world has any agency. That if anything, if a war happens, if a overthrow of a government happens, or it can only be because of us. It's not because other people in other countries have like a mind or a will of their own. They can only ever be puppets dancing at the end of America's strings. And I don't know how many Ukrainians you've ever met, but the idea that they are pliant and easily controlled people, yeah. And I have a lot of issues with Zelensky's government and his party at this point. And it is a big problem that they have very legitimate reasons as to why it'd be very difficult for them to hold an election right now. But it has been too long. And they have been using their conscription in a way that is socially biased and politically biased. There's been that people who are critics of the government are more likely to get conscripted than those who aren't. There's real problems there. I'm not trying to romanticize Ukraine or make it sound like a perfect angelic bastion of democracy, but I know this: they have acted within the boundaries of international law and the Geneva Conventions at a time when not only has their opponent made no effort to, but we have made no effort to, as we bomb school children. And even when we are in no danger, Ukraine is in an existential danger fighting for their lives and their existence. And they have shown more morality and ethics and restraint and regard for the law and regard for human life than we have in my frickin' lifetime. War is always brutal and wicked, but they have been doing it the best way it can be done. The least monstrous way that war can be fought. That is what they have been doing. They have time and again proven, they are only targeting military objects or infrastructure directly related to war production and war logistics. They are the example that we should be following. Right now, they are the moral leaders of the democratic world insofar as they are fighting for their survival, and they are doing it in a way that still says we're not going to take any action that will intentionally kill a Russian civilian. We're never going to target a Russian child. We're never going to target a hospital. And what's their reward for that? This shit. To be spoken of as if they're these people that went out in the streets and bled to overthrow their Donald Trump. His name was Viktor Yanukovych. That was their version of Donald Trump. And they had the courage and the community and the wherewithal to stand up and drive him out of the country and send him scurrying back to his master in the Kremlin. And then what's the reward for that? They get called, CIA puppets. Are you kidding? Does Voice of America have a role in stirring the pot when stuff happens? Sure. But, the idea that any of this happened or is happening because of us is ignorant and morally obscene. And the idea of luring in Kat Abughazaleh and bushwhacking her, ambushing her like that about Ukraine, specifically zeroing in the entire time for an hour on Ukraine, disavow Ukraine, say it's fine if Russia conquers them, say they should all speak Russian, why? I really ask myself, is it literally just because there's, Krystal has become, an extreme isolationist where, what happened to our generation with Iraq, just cracked her completely to where it's no, I will not support there will be no circumstance in which I will ever say it's all right for us to give military aid to any other country ever. Whereas I think, 75% of the world's dictatorships are supported by us, are armed and funded by us. We're arming a fucking genocide against the people of Palestine. But I experience a moment of relief when I think, once in a while, even if it's not always for the right reasons, hey, once in a while we end up doing a decent thing, even if it's an accident. You know, we end up giving someone, you know, weaponry to someone that actually has a righteous cause, someone that actually is defending themselves and protecting what they have built and strive for. And the attitude, I mean, the comfort that Krystal had in her ignorance of what, just in every current sense, politically, tactically, militarily, economically, like what the situation is, and the lack of depth or detail in anything that she or Ryan Grimm asked, just astonishing. And here would be Kat Abughazaleh would only have been the second Palestinian American in Congress, and they barely discussed that. And I know Krystal would probably say, well, it's because, there's no tension there, that, like Krystal's been stalwart against the genocide in Gaza, and bless her heart, she held Senator Slotkin to account for her duplicity and complete lack of a moral center on this. And so maybe part of it, the game in her head is like, I have to make sure I'm super tough on Kat so that no one accuses me of playing favorites. And that's fine. It's fine if you do it the right way, with facts and reason and reality on your side. But to tell her to spit on Ukraine and you can try to protect, that's what it was. I mean, it's not like, oh, well, should you do this different or should you do that? It's like, well, why haven't they just agreed to negotiate with Russia again, even though Russia keeps canceling all the so-called negotiations, and they never keep any agreement they agree to, and they continually change demands and put in new demands even after, when it seems like something's about to be agreed, they add 12 bullshit unreasonable demands at the last second. They use the same playbook Israel does every single time. And you can read Ian Pape and find out about what the cabinet meeting was like in 1968, after they had annexed the Gaza territory and the Transjordan territory that we call the West Bank now. After they had done that, they were talking about, well, how will the U.S. come after us for this? Is there going to be, because we've broken international law, we're flagrantly ignoring the UN measure from 1948 that established the new nation of Israel, because that same measure also established a nation of Palestine, but now they're annexing literally all of it. It was a pale shred of its former self. The people who lived in Palestine only got a third of the land. That was the original map from 1948. But nevertheless, here they were, just 20 years later, just taking all of it and saying fuck it. And there's a cabinet meeting where basically, I think it was Moshe Dayan that said, we can keep them in a stateless condition for at least 50 years before we'll have any serious problems. But they were totally fine with, breaking the law and subjugating and destroying these people, but they were worried about the ramifications from the rest of the world. And they said, well, we'll solve that by initiating a peace process to determine fairly and justly what happens to the Palestinians. And one of, I think it might have actually been Menachem Begin, in the meeting, who, expressed concern about this peace process. And then Dayan said, no, it was Abba Ibn who said this, and that's significant because he was one of the first ambassadors to the U.S. and the founder of AIPAC, propaganda minister, the Goebbels of the operation. I think it was Abba Ibn who said, a peace process is not the same thing as peace. In other words, we're going to drag this peace process out forever, for decades. And by the time it reaches any kind of conclusion, it'll be a moot point because we'll already have colonized the whole thing. And that is exactly the same playbook that Russia uses again and again, which makes sense because a huge portion of Israeli society is Russian. And that is how the Likud party is kept in power in Israel, by the way. An endless torrent of immigration from Russia since the 90s that all vote far right. And strangely enough, are not subjected to the same level of scrutiny, to have to prove their Jewishness that other people are. So they just keep coming and say, oh yeah, and they just, oh, cool, come on in. And they vote Likud, and that's how it goes. So it's gotten to be, I think, close to like 1/4 or 1/3 of Israeli society now is Russian speaking. Again, Tel Aviv, Moscow, DC, especially now, you can't disentangle one from the other. And so for Krystal Ball to do that, to Kat Abughazaleh, someone who was this young hope so much like her, to ambush her and say, spit on an important constituency in the city you live in now, and tell them they don't deserve freedom and independence, and tell them that they don't deserve their own language and culture, and tell them that they should engage in good faith with negotiations where the people that have done 3 or 4 genocides against them in the past, in as many centuries, are saying, yes, you must give up 30% of your territory to us, and also you must abolish half of your military. And also we will give you no security guarantees or assurances that this will ever happen again. No NATO membership, no EU membership. That's what Russia demands. And then even when Ukraine says, like, okay, well, maybe we could agree to that then Russia adds 50 more demands. Because that's what scumbag, lying, degenerate Nazis do. But the glibness and the casual way that Krystal, not just to do what she did, but to do it in such a casual, breezy way, and to feel seemingly no sense of shame or regard that, like, well, if I'm going to spend 45 minutes hammering someone, demanding that they piss on a constituency in the election that is neck and neck that they're running in, I better make sure I come correct and have done my research well. When it was like, it clearly seemed like Krystal had not even taken a refresher or like read up on anything in Ukraine in the past 3 or 4 years. And the last thing that needs to be said, because I'm going to articulate plenty of criticism of Kat and the type of campaign she ran. Not Kat as a person, you understand. But that's exactly my point. I am really impressed with what she did. And I wasn't sure she would. I don't know if I would in the same circumstance. After, all the work and all the effort put in to get to that point, to, take on a very, a candidate, Daniel Biss, who had every institutional and structural advantage in the world, and to get as far as she got, it took a lot of integrity to sit there in that interrogation and say, no, I stand for all colonized people, regardless of religion or color or what continent it is. I stand with all colonized people, and I support them in their struggle to preserve their lives and homes and freedom. And now within that, there's lots of room for conversation about, well, what's the best way to go about it, and what have we done in the past that has only hurt the situation rather than helped, or yada yada. There's plenty of things to be said within that, but only within the framework of being clear morally and factually what the situation is. And for Kat to sit there and take it and say, no, I'm not going to abandon anyone. I'm not going to sell out anyone. I'm not going to say that any group of people's rights and humanity don't matter or are less important. That, to me, showed a tremendous amount of character and integrity. And yes, of course, she's doing what's in her electoral. Well, again, that's the trick of it. She was put in a dilemma. She's doing what's electorally good for her, and that it would be a bad thing for her to piss off Ukrainian Chicagoans. But, of course, also by standing firm and being consistent and true and principled and saying, My sympathies lie with all colonized peoples fighting for their freedom. She knew how that would be twisted and misrepresented by the biggest grifters and scumbags on the left. And I'm not saying Krystal is a scumbag, but I am saying that this interview she conducted gave fodder and chum to all the scumbags that just don't know and don't care and just want to, like, quote some theoretical line from 150 years ago and blah, 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 and therefore we should be totally isolationist and pretend the rest of the world doesn't exist and yada, yada. When actually we need to do the opposite. We need to have global solidarity as working people, but suddenly now it's fascists who have their own freaking international, and it's leftists who are sticking their head up their butts and saying, I don't care about anything that happens outside of my home. It's a disturbing trend that will be a hindrance to us all. But the point is, what that showed me is that Kat has a real and true motivation in what she's doing. And I always felt this from her, but this was like proof of it. That contrary to people saying she's in it for herself, she's just ambitious, she just wants to be famous, yeah. I'll get to them. But no, she is in this, and she is desperately driven to win and to gain that national power. But the reason she is to stand up for her people. I have never been more certain of that, and that's where her sort of bravado comes from, good or bad. Like, that she is in this for the right reasons, for moral reasons, for a cause, for a purpose. And a candidate that was only trying to promote themselves and win a race, in that circumstance especially, they would have sold out the Ukrainians or anyone else they had to. They would, just like they'd sell out trans people, just like they'd sell out gay people, Arabs, Muslims, whoever it'll be tomorrow that the DNC will tell you, no, never mind the polls, never mind the autopsy report that we buried and shredded about how, we lost because of the genocide in Gaza. No. It's just this group of voters you need to sacrifice. It's that group of voters you need to sacrifice to the Nazis. And then the fever will break. If we only just help them kill these 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 groups of Untermenschen, why then they'll vote for Kamala next time. But instead, in Kat Abughazaleh, I see clearly someone that will not bend or buckle, and someone who, under what I can only describe as an interrogation, a withering interrogation, of like trying to get someone, gosh, it sure would be a bad thing for your campaign if I, Krystal Ball, were to characterize you as a warmonger, Kat. Don't you want to just say it, Kat. Just say the Ukrainians don't matter. Just say it, Kat. Like that, the cynical winking nature of it is the part that really shocked me and took me back. And I don't know where it comes from or what it's for. And I really hope it's not just some personal assault about the idea of seeing another ambitious young woman coming very close to claiming what you almost claimed but were deprived and cheated of, Krystal. I really hope this is not a matter of paying it forward, as we so often make fun of people our age, talk about how vindictive and nasty the boomers are in this way. And there's so much of like, oh, well, I had to suffer, so therefore all my children should have to suffer the same way. Or, life was hard for me, so it should be hard for everyone. I really hope there's not some more sophisticated version of that same crude impulse at work that, led Krystal to hold Kat, even if we grant that her factual misrepresentations were honest errors, that would try to put Kat in that position or hold her to an impossibly high standard. Because I've seen women in the academy do the same thing. And it would be a real disappointment and an existential fucking crisis, lethal to all of us, to see it happen in this context.